911, what's your emergency?
I'm calling about a noise complaint.
All right, can you give me the details?
What? What was that? Sorry, I could barely hear you over all the racket.
I can't hear anything, sir.
You think I'm a liar?
No, sir.
Yeah, you do. First the landlord, now goddamn 911. Nobody gives a shit.
Sir, I honestly can't hear a thing.
Well, it's driving me crazy.
All right, sir, can you describe the noise?
It's music. Heavy metal, to be exact.
Uh-huh.
He's been playing it nonstop for 3 hours now.
Uh-huh.
He moved into my apartment building 6 months ago. He lives right above me and is always making noise. If it's not his music, it's either him pacing around in his giant work boots or having sex with his girlfriend.
Have you ever tried talking to this neighbor? What about your landlord?
Oh, believe me, I have. The landlord just told me to stop being such a curmudgeon. That little prick upstairs, he just laughed in my face.
Uh-huh.
I'm sure he makes all that noise on purpose just to annoy me. And I'm also sure his skank of a girlfriend is in on the whole thing.
What makes you say that?
Because she does nothing to stop it.
All right, sir, the police are on their way.
Good. Hopefully that will teach him. I thought for sure he would shape up after the trick I pulled last night.
Explain what happened.
Well, he and his girlfriend were playing their stupid music as usual. I felt like I was going insane, like my brain was swelling up inside my skull and would soon leak out of my ears, nose, which sounds ridiculous, but that was honestly how I felt.
I see.
I'm not usually an angry guy, and I'm not violent either. Never laid a hand on another human being in my life. But that night, something inside me just came undone, you know? I just couldn't take it anymore.
Did you confront your neighbor, sir?
Yeah, I did. But at first I went into my kitchen and I grabbed the biggest, sharpest knife I own. Don't get me wrong. I didn't intend to kill anybody.
Sir, what did you do?
Well, I went upstairs and began pounding on the door. The kid finally answered and gave me this look that just sent me into a frenzy. It was a look that screamed, "You're the lowest f***ing life form on the planet, and I love making your life miserable." You get it? Me, a grown man and a former soldier. I decided I need to teach that brat a lesson.
It sounds like you were quite upset.
Yeah, I was. Looking back, I know I seriously overreacted. But in the moment, I just got so overwhelmed with anger, you know?
I understand, sir. Can you tell me what happened next?
I slashed the kid with the knife. Got him in the face and the neck. He didn't cry out, didn't make a sound. He just fell.
Uh-huh.
He was still moving, though, so I knew I hadn't killed him. But I wasn't done yet. I wasn't satisfied, so I went after his girlfriend.
Uh-huh.
She was cowering behind the couch, shaking like a leaf. Her eyes were huge. I don't think I've ever seen human eyes that huge before. She was terrified, but she didn't scream. It was weird. You'd think she'd be screaming bloody murder, but no.
Did you do anything to the girl, sir? Did you attack her with the knife?
I didn't want to hurt her, you know. She may have been a stupid little tramp, but she didn't deserve what happened to her. I know that now.
What did you do, sir?
I went after her with a knife. That's when she began screaming. She ran, but I chased her down and dragged her back into the living room. I threw her on the couch and began slashing. I didn't want to kill her.
How many times did you slash her?
I don't know. At least 100 times, if I had to guess. I stopped when I realized how badly she was bleeding. At that point, the fight just went out of me, so I threw the knife aside and left.
You just left?
Yeah.
All right.
I guess I should have, called an ambulance for them or something, but I figured they would be okay. I mean, while I was in the Army, I saw men get turned inside out, reduced to hamburger meat, and live to tell the tale.
I see. The police are on their way, sir. I want you to stay inside your apartment, all right?
Yeah, okay.
Good. Now when they get there...
The man who made the call was a former sniper in the military who had returned from his final tour with a serious case of PTSD. This led, among other things, to severe misophonia. The noise from upstairs would have been easily ignored by most people, but to him it was unbearable. One night, he just snapped. Apparently, no one else in the apartment heard anything unusual, and the horrific scene was only discovered when the killer himself made the noise complaint. The caller was delusional and didn't seem to grasp the reality of what he'd done. He kept insisting that he'd only wanted to scare the couple, then denied ever confronting them at all. He eventually committed suicide in prison while awaiting trial, though I couldn't find out how he did it. As for the music he'd called 911 to complain about, well, it was still playing because there was no one in the apartment to turn it off. The caller heard it, thought his neighbors were fucking with him again, and more or less confessed a double homicide to my grandmother. I feel terrible for the victims, obviously, but I can't help but feel bad for the caller as well. What he did was beyond terrible, but it's clear he was just very sick and in an awful mental state. If he had just gotten the help he so desperately needed, maybe none of this would ever have happened. I have a cousin in the military, and I sincerely hope he doesn't end up like that maniac.
I noticed it first on a Monday after an unusually brutal shift at work. Customers hounding me for refills, sauce on the side, extra napkins. You know how it is. That day was especially bad because I had one guy try the dollar bill trick on me. You know the one. He set out 5 ones and took away $1 every time I messed up or wasn't fast enough. I wasn't angry at him for taking any away, only that he expected me to bend over backwards for $5 fucking dollars. Get real. After dealing with all of that, the last thing I wanted to see on my way to the front door was a creepy old man staring at me. He had been my duplex neighbor for over 5 years. Most people wouldn't live in a duplex for so long, but we only shared one wall with each other, and he was always very timid. The only sounds I heard through the wall were his low humming to jazz tunes and the clinking of pots as he cooked. This was his daily routine after spending hours in the garden talking to his flowers. He was a little off, sure, but he was very sweet. He respected my privacy and never approached me aside from the occasional hello. Things changed a lot when his grandson moved in. Of the few conversations we had, he had not once mentioned a family. That's why I thought it was strange to see a chalky, scruffy, 20-something man dragging a suitcase into the unit beside me on a warm Wednesday afternoon. I didn't ask who he was, but when he saw me reclining on my patio chair, he perked up with a, "Oh, you must be my new neighbor. My name is Cameron." He told me all about how much he missed his grandfather after so many years and how he was too elderly to be living alone. Something about him seemed off. I can't describe it, but it wasn't my business, so I brushed it off. Suddenly, I was seeing more and more of Cameron and less of my elderly neighbor. He was no longer spending time in the garden. I could no longer hear the faint jazz through the walls. Instead, I heard whirring of tools every night until 11 p.m., like a late-night remodel was happening next door. Honestly, it was so faint it never bothered me. At one point, those noises stopped too, and that's when I saw my elderly neighbor again. I stepped out of my car one day and began walking towards my front door when I caught something in the corner of my eye. The sunlight was hitting my neighbor's window at the perfect angle where I could hardly see anything but bright, flooding yellow. I squinted hard to make out the shape. All I could see was a figure standing behind the window, perfectly still. I decided not to dwell on it too much and went inside, but something about that sent a chill down my spine and lingered in my thoughts. As I lay in bed, I still couldn't forget about it. The next day, I glanced over at my neighbor's window, but the curtains were drawn. Well, maybe it was my imagination. So I went off to work like usual. Once I came home, he was standing there, staring, waiting behind his large glass window. His loose, draping skin accentuated by the fact he was completely nude. He stared at me with hazy eyes and a sick expression on his face. It made me gag. I knew he was standing there for me. I had been coming home at the same time every day for years. I remained frozen, unsure of if I should head inside or get in my car and drive somewhere far away. In the end, I decided I may have been overreacting. Cameron had told me a few days prior that the old man was suffering from dementia, which worsened every day. I didn't want to do anything rash, especially since my sweet neighbor was sick. He probably wasn't standing there on purpose. I decided to let it go. But days turned into weeks, and the old man was waiting by the window every day. Even when I changed shifts, he was always there, waiting. Sometimes he was sitting on his satin chair with a cup of tea. But certain things remained the same, such as his naked, forever drooping skin and his hazy expression. Sometimes it felt like he grinned at me as I walked by. Nights felt uncomfortably cold as his loud breathing echoed through our shared wall. It felt as if he was always watching, even when he wasn't by the window. I never saw him come out of the house. I don't know if he ever left. Only Cameron would leave occasionally to gather groceries and come home whistling tunes on his way in. I tried to avoid looking at the old man as much as possible, but I noticed how sickly he became. Once, I leered a little longer near my door to see if he would turn to watch me leave. That day he was just standing there, unmoving, his skin drooping almost to the floor. I don't know why I knocked on his door. I don't know if I was worried about him or fed up. I just knew I couldn't take much more of the staring. It was driving me crazy. It only took 2 knocks before Cameron opened the door. "Hey, Rye, what can I help you with?" he said nonchalantly. Rye. Only my friends call me Rye. Who does this guy think he is calling me that when we've only exchanged a few sentences to each other? That really irritated me, and I became a little more aggressive. "Can I come in? I need to talk to you." I was unwilling to hide the agitation in my voice. He whistled. "Now really isn't the time. Can I invite you over for dinner later?" "No, we need to talk now." I was beginning to push my way in when I stopped. I saw something in my peripheral that made my stomach turn. I looked up at Cameron, my fearful expression crystal clear in his dilated pupils. His breathing became heavy. He looked excited. He reached out to grab me, but I was too fast. I ran into my unit and tightly locked the door. With trembling fingers, I dialed 911. Thump, thump, thump. Cameron was hitting hard against our shared wall. "Come back. Let's have dinner." His muffled voice somehow carried into my living room. I tried to keep my composure so I could describe to the 911 operator exactly what I saw at my neighbor's house. Once they informed me the police would arrive in 15 minutes, I grabbed a knife from the kitchen and huddled into a corner of my living room. Cameron was still pounding against the wall, repeating the same 5 words. After about 10 minutes, he stopped. Silence. Then I heard the creaking of the neighbor's back door. It's funny how many small sounds you can make out when your senses are in survival mode. I sat, praying that he wouldn't try to come into my home. It was dark now, and the silence had filled with the chirping of crickets. My prayers were answered when I saw glaring red and blue lights approach our driveway. Loud knocking nearly made me jump out of my skin. I slowly approached the window and let out a sigh of relief when I saw the cop standing there. I cautiously opened the door. "Ma'am, you called about some suspicious activity next door?" "My neighbor's skin," I whispered. The fear had managed to take my voice away to where I could barely speak. "What?" The policemen looked at each other in confusion. I pointed at the window attached to my neighbor's unit. Unlike other nights, the curtains were wide open, and the silhouette of the old man's draping body stood behind the window. The police scurried over to the neighbor's unit and disappeared behind the door. I watched from the other side of the window as one of the policemen turned my elderly neighbor around. From my view, I could see all of the stitching on his back. A poorly sewn-on zipper adorned the center so that his skin could be worn like a sick, repulsive costume. I couldn't take it anymore. I let out all the vomit I had been holding back up to this point. The police didn't seem too pleased with their discovery either. Cameron, if that even was his real name, was never caught. I described him to the police, but his face was the type that didn't stand out at all. If I were to try and pick him out of a crowd, I'm not confident I could. He wasn't my neighbor's grandson, obviously. Sadly, my neighbor didn't have a family, but he seemed happy by himself up until, you know. I had seen the old man a few times after Cameron moved in, but he was acting strange. I wish I had paid attention back then. I don't blame myself, but I do feel regret for the way things turned out. One thing's for sure, though. I'm never living so close to a neighbor again.
In the fall of 2016, I moved into a home I got for a very reasonable price. I was newly single, so I wanted a place to myself. It had 3 bedrooms, a big bathroom, spacious kitchen, and a nice living room with a bay window. The basement was one big space with a laundry unit, so this was more than enough for me. The block was mostly abandoned houses with only 5 other families occupying the other properties. I only had one neighbor right beside my home. I wasn't a social bug at the time, so I never bothered to meet the neighbors. It seemed that my neighbor was also single and a female, slightly older than me. She was Hispanic, or at least seemed to be. On the 3rd day, she greeted me from her yard as I was taking out the trash. She said her name was Griselda and that she was house-sitting for her sister, who was in Guerrero, Mexico with her 2 nieces, for the next few months. She didn't say much after that. Over the next week, I would constantly catch her watching me as I did my normal house routines, as well as yard work. She would look from her windows as I would be cooking or cleaning. I would usually just ignore it and close my shades. I'm not one to worry much, so it didn't bother me at first. When I would come and leave for work, she would always be on her porch in her wooden chair. I started to wonder if she even had a job. She never left her house, not even for groceries or to take out her garbage. She even wore the same clothes every day. Her house lights were never on. The only light that would be on was the basement, and that was only at night. No crime was committed, so I couldn't report this, so I just kept to myself. Around the 2nd month, I became aware she was speaking what I believe was Latin on her porch as she watched me come and go for work. Strange things began to happen. Things in the house went mysteriously missing. Small random things like my comb, photos, and even an old kitchen knife. I would come home and a window would be slightly open, a light would be on, that I knew was off. The basement door would be unlocked. I would always keep it locked. Even my garbage cans would look like someone was looking through them. This began to concern me. One night I woke up to the sound of leaves rustling outside my bedroom window. I see her crouched down looking inside my basement and the light was on. I go to my porch to confront her before checking my basement. She was already on her porch. I told her to stay the fuck off my property. She gives me a dirty look, says something under her breath, and then spits in my direction. I storm inside and head for my basement. All the missing items were on the basement floor. What the fuck? I gather them and put them on the kitchen counter. I was very sleepy, so I chose to go back to sleep since I had a long work day ahead. The next night was not what I expected. As I left for work at 7 a.m., I noticed she was on her porch this time. Thank goodness, she gets the point, I thought to myself. That night I woke up, I hear this woman. She's in my house. Her voice was coming from the basement. I get my baseball bat and head downstairs. Basement door is wide open and the light's on. She wasn't down there, but I found 3 rats that were gutted. Their insides were scattered around the basement. Suddenly I hear footsteps going up the stairs to the bedroom. I run up and find her naked, sitting at the foot of my bed. She had blood on her hands, arms, chest, and face. She killed those rats with her fucking teeth. She hissed at me and I slammed the door shut, locking her in. I called the police and they arrive in minutes. They informed me that her name was Ashley. They also discovered her sister and the 2 nieces in the basement of their home. Their bodies were propped on a couch. They were decomposing. A camera on a tripod was in front of them. She was taking photos with them and had a smile on each one. She stabbed them to death. The police stated that the photos went back as far as 3 months. The bodies slowly decomposing in each of them. I believe I was about to be your next victim. I still live here, but I'm more cautious about the people around me. I now know to report suspicious behavior when I see it. Stay safe, y'all.
So, I'm in my early 20s and female. I moved out on my own for the first time about 2 years ago. I haven't had much to do with any of my neighbors, I've always been slightly uneasy to the fact that no one around here is looking out for me. If anything seems off, no one would notice or do any investigating to make sure I'm alright. Last year, I noticed a man constantly walking his dog in the grass area behind my home. This isn't unusual to see. It's a common area for residents here. His dog is super cute, and my cat liked to play with it through the glass door out back. They would just chase each other back and forth and put their paws up to the glass and such. Real cute stuff. Well, one day I was outside, and his dog came running up to my porch with glee to get pets and say hi to his kitty friend. This is the first time I actually spoke to this neighbor. We'll call him Mark. So Mark seemed decent enough, and we got along just fine. We started hanging out pretty often in a short time period, because I'm a smoker and he was letting his dog out all the time. And it was summer, so we ran into each other quite often, and would spend an hour or more after work most days talking. This lasted for a couple of weeks. I gave him my phone number and was happy to have a friend in my complex. I will say, he was clearly very interested in either having a romantic relationship with me, or at least being butt buddies. He said this quite a lot. Not butt buddies, but you get what I'm saying. I was very honest with him that I wasn't interested in either at all, and had to tell him this quite often. Frankly, I was getting rather irritated that this came up several times every time we spoke. He rather quickly was trying to get me in his house. From the first time we talked until the last, he offered multiple times every time I saw him. I always said no and blamed it on me being COVID cautious. He quickly got tired of that excuse and invited himself to my home as well. I always said no. One day he came out while I was smoking with a bottle of wine and a couple of glasses, saying I had to try this stuff because it's delicious. I instantly noticed that the seal is broken, screw cap bottle, but doesn't seem like anything was drank. The bottle was filled to the brim, which I also thought was a little odd because usually wine isn't filled to the tippy top like that. So he pours a couple of glasses and doesn't drop a beat in telling me to take a drink. I felt very uncomfortable, but didn't want him to feel like he was being accused of anything when he's just trying to be a nice, friendly neighbor. After all, he poured himself a glass of this very same stuff, right? Well, my mama still raised me better than that, so I totally faked a sip and said it was good. After any sentence either of us said, he would again tell me to take a drink. I told him I don't really drink, so I'm pacing myself, but did say that I noticed he hadn't drank any, and to please go ahead. He didn't reach for his glass right away, but in the middle of speaking, he reached for his cup and knocked it over, spilling the wine into the grass. He brushed it off rather quickly and told me it's my turn to drink now. I said, "But you still haven't drank anything. You spilled your drink. Pour yourself another glass. I don't want to drink alone." So he did. He still didn't drink anything. He did tell me a few moments later to drink mine. I told him that he needs to catch up, and we basically just kept doing that in circles. He reached for his glass again, and guess what? Spilled it again. Wine's all in the grass now. Then he told me to drink. At this point, I'm done. Too many red flags are screaming at me to get the hell out. I'm honest with him that this seemed really sketchy, and I didn't trust the drink because he's refusing to drink any, but is way too eager for me to drink mine. He told me he was just clumsy and taking it slow because he doesn't drink a lot, but he's seen me have friends over taking shots and drinking beers and wine, so he knows I'll handle it better than him. Yet another red flag is raised. So he's been watching me, huh? I think it's important to mention that our complex is huge. He used to work here and knows the maintenance crew, and he doesn't live particularly near me. He's about half a block away from me and cannot see my windows or yard from where he lives, and has a few different common area yards closer to him that he could use for his dog. So I told him that I'm flat out not drinking anything because of how all this seemed. He once again pours himself a glass and once again spills it. There isn't much left in the bottle at this point. I pour the remaining wine in his glass and tell him to drink with me on 3. We raise our glasses. To my amazement, he actually takes a drink, and I spilled mine into the grass. Oops. He comes out about 2 nights later while I was smoking, and instantly starts complaining to me that I wouldn't date him or have sex with him, and he doesn't know why all girls are like this. He starts getting really loud, shouting at me asking what the problem with him is, that I won't do these things. I told him that I'd been honest with him since I had met him that I'm not interested in that, and that it isn't him specifically. I'm just honestly not interested in that from anyone right now. He still shouted at me and started complaining about his ex and her dog. Yes, her dog. Then proceeded to tell me that he used to abuse the shit out of that dog, and went into detail about how he wouldn't feed or water it because it used the bathroom in the house, and how he would kick it really hard. I'm horrified at this point, especially considering this whole time he's telling me this, he's playing fetch with his little dog. His dog always seems scared of him, and I'd even pointed that out in the past, and he said that his dog's previous owners were abusive, so he's just very scared and distrusting. The dog was always very excited to see me though, and would cuddle up with me and stay by me, so I always thought I was extra special. But with that knowledge, I just think the poor guy is currently in an abusive household. I was so done with this guy that I just cut him off and said I needed to go because my friends were waiting on me. He sent me several messages of gibberish when he's outside. He'll just blow my phone up with, hey, hi, jajeb, jajeb, jack, lol, my name, hi, quibjik. It'll just keep going. He's texted me telling me that he knows I'm home because he's seen me walking around, that he sees my car a lot. He'll throw his dog toys on my porch, I think trying to get my attention to come out because of the cute dog. He'll just stand outside my porch for hours. It's all cold and rainy and snowy these days, so it's even creepier. I think in his mind, since I'm a smoker, I'll come out eventually. Silly him though, because I just go out front when I see him out there. He said several things to me before the wine fiasco went down that were red flags. I figured it might be a language or cultural differences though, because English is the third language he's learned, and America is the third country he's lived in. I guess moral of the story is to just trust your gut. He's still bothering me, and like I'd said, we only spoke and hung out for a few weeks in summer of 2020. My last message from him was last night. He asked me what he had done wrong, and if I felt disrespected in any way. I've not spoken to him since he screamed at me for not sleeping with him, sandwiched with admitting horrible animal abuse. I thought about answering his text with the brutal truth, about how twisted and creepy he presented himself as, and how uncomfortable he made me feel, but I didn't want to give him any ideas on how he should improve. Stay smart, folks. Don't drink things people give you if the seal is broken. He was definitely trying to drug me. To everyone telling me to move, I really appreciate the concern for my safety. I'd love to move since I've become uneasy in my own home environment, but moving is expensive and not something I can afford at the moment. I also do have a stun gun, pepper spray, and handgun. I'm extremely reluctant to ever use a gun on a person, but I do have training on the weapon. I do bring the pepper spray with me every time I go outside now, even if it's just to take garbage out or pop in my car for a second.
When I was 25, there was a short time I was staying at my aunt's. It was her, my 2 cousins, and I. She lives in a nice apartment complex, and her unit is on the lower level. Her living room has a lot of windows that she keeps open for fresh air and for her cats to people watch. Her unit happens to be on the corner near a grassy courtyard path. When I had first moved in, I noticed a man who gave me an off vibe. My cousins and aunt said he lived upstairs and 2 units over, recovering from hard drugs that permanently messed him up. His parents paid for him to stay there as they didn't want him with them. They also said, other than hearing him mumble and say weird things, no one had ever had an issue. My aunt works nights and leaves at 3 a.m. My younger cousin works nights and leaves at 2 a.m. That usually left my same-aged cousin and I, the only 2 there, until we leave for work around 8. For context, it is a very open living room to dining room plan. My aunt always had people staying over, so she has a second couch in the dining room in place of a table. This is where I slept. She stayed on the one in the living room. My aunt has also never been one to lock her doors, until this incident. One night, I'm on my phone trying to sleep at about 1 a.m. and hear a man yelling. He's yelling, "Don't shoot," and banging on the door to the right of ours. 2 male college students live there and just told him he had the wrong apartment and to leave. He says sorry and walks off. I am looking through the kitchen window, which is in direct line of sight from my couch bed, and it's the weird neighbor who sees me and grins. He then walks back to his home. I was unsettled, but not enough to wake anyone else up over it. Told my family nonchalantly the next day in a LOL that was weird way. My cousin and I watch a movie and head off to bed. I have a very hard time staying asleep, but I woke up this time to the feeling of someone watching me. I check my phone and it's around 3:30 a.m., so I know that it's not my aunt or cousin. I sit up and figure I'll go watch TV on my aunt's couch since she was gone already. The feeling gets stronger as I am in the living room. Then, I see the shadow of a person standing still in the grass courtyard looking in. I froze. I immediately go back to my couch to get my phone. As I do, the person is gone. I am now trying to calm myself down and think of waking my cousin up when I hear the creepy man's voice. He is now at the kitchen window, which looks out directly in front of her front door. I drop to the floor, out of his line of sight, and start frantically trying to call my cousin. The man is now saying things at the window front door like, "I'm not going to hurt you," and "I'm unarmed," over and over again. His face is up against the window. Then he starts talking about wanting to pet the cats he saw through the window. I can't get a hold of my cousin. It's been 20 minutes of this at this point. In this completely clown shit situation, I don't have many options. I could jump up and run for a knife, but I'd need to go to the kitchen. I could try to respond and ask him to leave, but I've learned when you underestimate crazy, you lose every time. I now hear him knocking and knocking while repeating his nonsense. I'm doing that ridiculous-looking army crawl snake slither across the floor down the hall now. I see the door handle start to turn. I'm about to jump up when my cousin bursts out of his room directly across from the front door. Now he's not the biggest guy, but boy, he was intimidatingly mad at the circus show taking place at his front door. He starts yelling at the guy that he needs to get the fuck off his porch and that he's calling the cops. The man tries to say, "I'm unarmed. I'm not going to hurt you. Don't be afraid." My cousin goes off and yells, "That's fucking dandy. It's 4 a.m. You need to leave or I'll call the cops. What the fuck is wrong with you?" So the guy backs up with his hands in the air and leaves. Needless to say, we didn't go back to sleep. My aunt was called, who called the apartment manager. The next day when I came home from work, his parents were there, packing moving boxes in a truck from his place. Maybe he was trying to get me to open the door by seeming friendly. Maybe he had a bad trip and really wanted to pet a cat to feel better. We will never know.
This happened a few years ago, but still freaks me out when I think about how differently it could have turned out. My hubs, baby, and I used to live in the not greatest apartment complex. There were 3 sections of the complex with a total of 6 apartments, 3 on top, 3 on bottom, in 2 different buildings within each section. I lived in the upper level, middle apartment on the second building in the second section. I got along with my neighbors fine. We actually all moved into our apartments within a few weeks of each other. To my left is a woman we will call Barb, in her 50s, and lives alone. Barb is a drinker and a big participant of any substances that make her feel good. Has a rotation of man friends that come and go. All fine by me. She gives me no issues, so I really don't give a fuck about what she does. But it needs to be mentioned for story purposes. I already mentioned that these weren't the best apartments. They were income-based, old, and cheap. I'm pretty sure the walls were insulated with newspaper if they had any insulation at all. So you could hear basically everything from both surrounding apartments and a lot from the units below. Only time it really became an issue is during nap time and nighttime when something would either prevent my 1-year-old from sleeping or wake him up. It didn't happen often, and when it did, I was able to go knock on the noise culprit's door and handle it with no issues. Since my child was still a baby, and I was constantly exhausted, 90% of the time his bedtime was my bedtime. Our bedrooms were on the opposite end of the apartment, from living room, kitchen, balcony, Barb's apartment. We also slept with both a noise machine and a fan to drown out any noise disturbances during the night. This particular night, though, my husband was off work and we decided to watch a movie. There was a party going on in the first building of our section. Barb was friends with the party throwers, and we could hear her in and out of her apartment door several times, as well as all the party people who were outside smoking. At some point during the movie, I fell asleep using my husband's lap as a pillow. Around 2 a.m., loud laughing from Barb's apartment wakes me up. I get up to pee and brush my teeth before coming back to kiss my husband goodnight and get in bed. Do my business and making my way back up the hall to the living room from bathroom to tell my husband goodnight. I hear knocking on Barb's door, followed with what sounds like her door exploding off its hinges and flying into the wall that separates her apartment and ours. My husband and I both say what the fuck at the same time and kind of just freeze. We hear Barb and a man talking, and it sounded like normal talking. They weren't yelling or anything, so we chalk it up to Barb and her guest having a little too much fun at the party and shrug it off. I get in bed and quickly fall back asleep. No more than 10 minutes after getting into bed, I wake up to what sounds like heavy furniture being body slammed coming from Barb's apartment. Irked as fuck from the second slumber disturbance, and knowing this is going to wake my kid up, I make my way to the living room, planning to put my slippers on and knock on Barb's door, and kindly ask her to shut the fuck up. I first walk out onto my balcony to smoke a cigarette, while hoping she realizes how loud whatever the fuck she's got going on is, and fix it without being asked. The body slamming furniture only gets even louder while on the balcony, so I assume they've worked their way through her apartment and are now body slamming her bedroom furniture now. Even more irritated now, I decide Barb's too blitzed to realize how loud she's being, and I'm going to have to remind her that none of us are deaf in my apartment. So she was going to have to move her furniture fight somewhere else, or reschedule for normal furniture fighting hours, which are obviously during the day. I stand up and take a few steps towards Barb's bedroom window, where our small bucket for cigarette butts sits on the ledge of my balcony. Her bedroom window and the closest edge of my balcony to her window are only inches apart. She could easily crawl out of her window and onto my balcony, and vice versa. And that's when I hear it. Muffled screams like someone is holding a hand over her mouth, and a man's voice say in a very low voice, "If you don't shut the fuck up, I'm going to kill you, you fuckers. So you're gonna fuck me and like it." Oh fuck is my first thought. I fly inside the sliding door from my balcony and grab my phone to call 911 while telling my husband Barb is in trouble. He goes out and bangs on her door. Nobody comes, and it's locked because he tried the door handle after not being answered. I'm standing between the living room and kitchen on the phone with 911, and husband walks outside and leans over to see if he can see anything through Barb's windows. The blinds are closed, but a couple of blind slats are broken, leaving a small crack big enough for my husband to see someone lying on the floor halfway in her bedroom and halfway into her bathroom, and another person standing over them. He tells me, and I relay it to the 911 operator, while also adding, if the police aren't here soon, we're gonna bust the door down ourselves. She calmly asked me not to do anything like that, to stay on the line, and that the police were en route and would arrive soon. About 2 minutes later, we hear several pairs of boots coming up the apartment stairs to get to the second level of our apartment, and then loud pounding, knocking with, "Police department, open up!" I crack my front door to peek out and tell them we can still see two people in the back bedroom of Barb's apartment. There are 4 uniformed police officers with their guns drawn, and the one standing in my front door tells me to go back inside and lock the door. Yes, sir. I go back inside and straight right inside my balcony door to watch for anything, like Barb trying to escape the man or the man trying to escape the cops. Hear another round of police pounding at Barb's door going unanswered, and then the sound of the door being kicked in. Fire and rescues have shown up by this point, and the whole complex is lit up with lights coming from emergency vehicles. We hear a small scuffle, and then the screen door of her apartment creaks open. I look out of the peephole and see a man in handcuffs being led down the stairs, and then EMT coming up the stairs with a stretcher. A few minutes later, we hear the screen door creak open again, and I see EMT carrying a stretcher with someone in it, and open my door. Barb is unconscious and in bad shape. Her face and head are bloody and swelling, and exposed skin of her arms are already bruising. As I'm staring at her in the stretcher, going down the stairs in disbelief, the same police officer that told me to get back inside and lock my door walks out of Barb's apartment and asks if he can speak to my husband and me. I say yes and invite him inside, where he thanks us for calling 911 and tells us he has little doubt that we saved Barb's life. Asks us what we heard, and I reiterate the whole story from beginning to end as he takes notes. He thanks us again and leaves. Barb calls me about a week later from the hospital to thank me. I ask her how she is, and she tells me that she has a fractured skull and bleeding on her brain, broken cheekbone and jaw, broken ribs, and lots of bruising all over her body, but feels lucky to be alive, and thanks me again. She also tells me the man is someone she has known for several years, that he had showed up at the party right before she went home to her own apartment and was mad she didn't want to sleep with him, and even madder that she had been super flirty with the POC at the party. Several months later, the ADA prosecuting the man calls me and asks me to tell her everything from that night. So I tell her, from start to finish too. She asked me if I would be willing to testify in court, and I tell her whatever she needs to lock that animal up. A couple of weeks after that, I come home and have a summons on my door to be a witness in the case, but the court date listed is already passed. I call the ADA back and explain both worried about how me not testifying hurt the case and putting him away, and also if I had a warrant out for my arrest for not showing. She tells me that the date was wrong, but that I'm also not needed. Catch up with Barb a few weeks after that, and she tells me that my recorded call to 911 was used during court and that the guy got 15 years in prison.